The New Despotism by the Right Honourable Lord Hewart of Bury, Lord Chief Justice of England. First published 1929. Prefatory Note. This little essay is obviously not intended to be more than a brief introduction to a topic of large and unhappily growing dimensions. An exhaustive examination of the pretensions and encroachments of bureaucracy, the new despotism, must await greater leisure and another occasion. Yet it seemed to be high time that, at any rate, a note of warning should be offered. Est quadam prodire tenus, si non datur ultra. Chapter 1. The Nature of the Question. Wordsworth begins a well-known poem with the words, "Oh, what's the matter? What's the matter?" A simple and prosaic question like that is not always easy to answer. Nor is it easy to express in a sentence, for the information of Lord Bowen's gentleman on the top of the Clapham omnibus, the precise nature of the present inquiry. Perhaps it may be well to offer at the outset a significant and recent example of the tendency which it is proposed to examine. On the 22nd December 1925, there was added to the Statute Book an Act of Parliament, entitled the Rating and Valuation Act 1925, which fills 90 pages in the authorised edition of the statutes. It is described as an act to simplify and amend the law with respect to the making and collection of rates. The marginal heading of Section 67 of the Act consists, pleasantly enough, of the words "power to remove difficulties," and the section provides that if any difficulty arises in connection with the application of the Act to any exceptional area, or the preparation of the first valuation list for any area, or otherwise in bringing into operation any of the provisions of this Act, the Minister may by order remove the difficulty. More than that, the Minister may constitute any assessment committee, or declare any assessment committee to be duly constituted, or make any appointment, or do any other thing which appears to him necessary or expedient for securing the due preparation of the list or of bringing the said provisions into operation. Finally, it is provided that any such order may modify the provisions of this Act so far as may appear to the Minister necessary or expedient for carrying the order into effect. It would be difficult to imagine more comprehensive powers or more remarkable legislation. The Act of Parliament not only in terms empowers the Minister to do anything which he may think expedient for the purpose named, but also in terms empowers him, if he thinks it expedient, to make orders which may modify the provisions of the Act of Parliament itself. These far-reaching powers were conferred upon the Minister by the statute for a period of no less than 3¼ years, that is, until the end of March 1929. In April 1927, this section was referred to in a case which came before a divisional court of the King's Bench. The details of the case need not be repeated. The question turned upon an order made by the Minister under the Act approving a scheme for an assessment area, to which objection was taken on the ground that the constituent authorities were entitled to decide among themselves on the size or number of the assessment committee and on the mode of representation of their own group. In the result, the court held that, in the particular case, there had been no usurpation or excess of jurisdiction. In the judgment, however, which expressed the unanimous opinion of the court, the following passage with reference to Section 67 of the statute is to be found at page 236. This, I think, though I say it with some hesitation, may be regarded as indicating the high watermark of legislative provisions of this character. It is obvious that if this court had taken another view of the case presented to us today, and had decided to quash this order as having been made ultra vires, the Minister might tomorrow, under the provisions of Section 67, have arrived at the same end by making an order and removing the difficulty. Now, it will probably be admitted that matters must have gone rather far before a Minister thought fit to propose, and Parliament, either deliberately or by inadvertence, consented to approve, a scheme that empowered a government department, on grounds of expediency, to make departmental orders modifying the provisions of the statute which conferred the power. A little inquiry will serve to show that there is now, and for some years past has been, a persistent influence at work which, whatever the motives or the intentions that support it may be thought to be, undoubtedly has the effect of placing a large and increasing field of departmental authority and activity beyond the reach of the ordinary law. Whether this influence ought to be encouraged, or whether it ought rather to be checked and limited, are questions into which, for the moment, it is not necessary to enter. But it does at least seem desirable that the influence itself should be clearly discerned, that its essential nature and tendency should be quite plainly exhibited, and that its various methods and manifestations should not be allowed to continue and multiply under a cloak of obscurity. The citizens of a state may indeed believe or boast that, at a given moment, they enjoy, or at any rate possess, a system of representative institutions, and that the ordinary law of the land, interpreted and administered by the regular courts, is comprehensive enough and strong enough for all its proper purposes. But their belief will stand in need of revision if, in truth and in fact, an organised and diligent minority, equipped with convenient drafts and employing after a fashion part of the machinery of representative institutions, is steadily increasing the range and the power of departmental authority and withdrawing its operations more and more from the jurisdiction of the courts. In order to perceive clearly the nature of this influence or tendency, and the relation in which it stands to the essential foundations of the Constitution, it may be well to examine briefly, first, the meaning and implications, on the one hand, of the rule of law, and, on the other hand, of the continental system of so-called administrative law, with which the rule of law is sharply contrasted. The apologists of the growing system, or lack of system, which it is here proposed to explore, sometimes permit themselves to speak of it as if it were administrative law, but the description, it will be seen, is quite curiously the reverse of the truth. The continental system of administrative law, profoundly repugnant as it is to English ideas, is at least a system. It has its courts, its law, its hearings and adjudications, its regular and accepted procedure. It would be a strange misuse of terms if the name of administrative law were to be applied to that which, upon analysis, proved to be nothing more than administrative lawlessness. Let nobody be so foolish or so flippant as to suppose that any attack is here intended upon what is a commonplace to describe as the best civil service in the world. In a treatise upon photography, as somebody says, one may assume the existence of the sun. In remarks upon the mischiefs of bureaucracy, one may assume the excellence of the civil service. Yet it may perhaps be well to remember that high capacity and ardent zeal never need to be more carefully watched than when they appear to have entered, with all their might, upon a wrong road. It does not take a horticulturist to perceive that, if a tree is bearing bad fruit, the more vigorously it yields, the greater will be the harvest of mischief. Many persons, of course, have from time to time perceived and deplored this particular mischief, but somehow some of them have found it more convenient to their inclinations or their aims to refrain from words even of good omen. They have passed by like the prudent Levite on the other side, or they have been content to say that, after all, people get the kind of government they deserve, wholly refusing to recognize the power of a skilful and organized minority. Or again, they have so nicely balanced their appreciation of what is good and their examination of what is less good that, with the convenient help of a little confusion of thought, they have left the detached spectator wondering upon which side they appeared. But to the impartial eye of the fearless citizen it is obvious that the official just as surely seeks to escape the jurisdiction of the courts when he takes power to make regulations having the force of a statute, as when he in terms provides that his decisions shall not by any method be open to review. It is no less obvious that, if such an endeavour were the isolated act of an ingenious individual, its consequences might be almost trivial, but other considerations apply if a mass of evidence establishes the fact that there is in existence a persistent and well-contrived system intended to produce, and in practice producing, a despotic power which at one and the same time places government departments above the sovereignty of Parliament and beyond the jurisdiction of the courts. If it appears that this system springs from and depends upon a deep-seated official conviction, which in turn it nourishes and strengthens by each successive manifestation of its vigour, that this, when all is said and done, is the best and most scientific way of ruling the country, the consequences, unless they are checked, must be in the highest degree formidable. That there is in existence, and in certain quarters in the ascendant, a genuine belief that parliamentary institutions and the rule of law have been tried and found wanting, and that the time has come for the departmental despot, who shall be at once scientific and benevolent, but above all a law to himself, needs no demonstration. There is an agreeable story, not too old, of a distinguished Anglo-Indian civilian, who, returning home on leave after a prolonged absence, passed the Houses of Parliament on his way from Victoria to Charing Cross. "What place is that?" he asked. "That, sir," was the answer, "is Parliament, the Houses of Parliament." "Really?" he exclaimed, though his exclamation was in fact slightly different. "Does that rubbish still go on?" Everybody knows the frame of mind, and everybody has met some of the teachers in that school. But another aspect of the matter is illustrated by a well-known conversation which took place, not so many years ago, between a distinguished Treasury official, if the epithet is not tautologous, and the Chancellor of the Exchequer. It happened that matters had not gone quite smoothly in the House of Commons that evening. The departmental specialist was not, for once, able to say to his chief, after the rising of the House, with that air which as nearly approaches a tone of triumph as official decorum permits, "Well, sir, we have got our clauses." What he did say was that he wondered whether all this palaver was really necessary. After all, what was the good of the House of Commons, and how perfectly useless was the House of Lords? Why should the work of the expert be always at the mercy of the ignorant amateur? Why should people be allowed to try to govern themselves when it was manifestly so much better for them to be governed by those who knew how to govern? Seriously, he asked, could not this country be governed by the civil service? Undoubtedly it could, replied the Chancellor of the Exchequer. Undoubtedly it could, and I am quite sure that you and your colleagues would govern the country remarkably well. But let me tell you this, my young friend, at the end of 6 months of it, there would not be enough lampposts in Whitehall to go round.